So today we're going to look at the questions that we get asked most from our vendors. So Phil, how can I make my practice more valuable?
Really easy here. Revenue, number one. Okay, so if you can increase revenue, the likelihood is, as long as you manage the cost base well, you will improve the value of the business. Okay, when we look at valuations of practices, it's all done on either EBITDA or fair maintainable trade, which are profit valuations. So they're not turnover derived, they're profit derived, but equally, the more revenue you have, okay, so if you can increase your revenue by 100 grand, the likelihood is that will drop down to profitability. But you've also got to manage profitability, okay? So you've got to manage headcount, you've got to manage staff costs, which are obviously one of the biggest expenses, associate fees, labs and materials. And one of the big ones when you're looking to increase revenue is just making sure you manage the advertising spend related to that revenue generation. Because there's no point of spending 20 grand on advertising to increase your revenue by 100 grand. Because if you've got to pay the dentist 50%, you've then got to pay the labs, you've got to pay the materials, and then you add in that 10 or 20 grand initial investment in the advertising, there is actually an EBITDA loss, okay? So you've got to really increase revenue by managing cost base and making sure that it's EBITDA profitable or profitable.
So looking at what you've just said, another one of our most common questions is, what is EBITDA?
Okay, so when we talk about EBITDA within a dental practice context and valuations, is what we're talking about is the associate-led profitability of the business. So if I'm an owner that works clinically within the business, what we need to do is to work out the investment profitability, is we need to build your current clinical income in as an associate cost within the profit and loss line. So all we're doing is we're saying if a principal's doing 100K of private income, is we're adding a cost into the associate line for delivery of that income. So if we place the principal on 45%, we would add 45% or 45,000 onto the associate fees, less the lab bills. So what we're effectively trying to create is the true profitability of the business if an investor who wasn't clinically working in the business was to look to buy that business. So there's further things that go into that, is in terms of adding back interest, depreciation, amortization, and other personal expenses which run through the accounts. But effectively, we're looking at the true profitability of the business.
The next question we get asked is, will it be a corporate buyer?
Okay, this is really easy to answer. 20% of our sales go to the big five and tier two buyers. That's buyers that own, let's say, 20 practices or more, which you would consider corporate. Now, that does leave 80% of our practices sold to independent buyers or somebody that owns one and looking to acquire their second practice, which is becoming increasingly more popular, especially in the current economic climate where interest rates are dropping, of where finance is more readily available and where the finance positioning is at a greater level. So to answer your question, is the likelihood is that it will be an independent, with the exception of higher grossing practices. So if you've got a revenue of say £2 million plus, is the likelihood is that you will be potentially selling to one of the corporates or a corporate group, just because of the value of the business. Then businesses become less attractive to mini groups because a lot of the revenue, a lot of the low-hanging fruit has already been capitalized, and there isn't the growth potential for mini owner-operated groups, which means that you're likely to sell to potentially a corporate.
So just on the back of that question, how long would I need to stay on for?
If you're selling to an independent buyer, that will really depend on, number one, how much revenue you're doing within the business, but number two, does that buyer need to take over your revenue to finance the practice? I.e., if you're two surgeries and you've got a hygienist working in the second surgery with a part-time associate and you're doing 5 days within the other surgery, is the likelihood is that that owner-occupier buyer is looking to replace you clinically to benefit from the clinical profit of working within the business for 5 days. If we look at, let's say, a 5-surgery practice of which you're selling to either a corporate or a mini group or an investor, and you're doing, let's say, 20 or 30% of the revenue attached to that business, and that business is intrinsically centered around you, the likelihood is no matter who the buyer is, whether that be an individual, a corporate or a mini group, there will be a deferred period to make sure that goodwill is transferred. Now, there's no set time on that stay on period. It is negotiable. But what I would say is it all comes down to risk. And what I would say is if you are the main point of contact in that practice and you're the biggest revenue generator within that practice and that goodwill centers around you, you need to factor in that tie-in will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, but it is really on a case-by-case basis. So the only way to really understand that tie-in is to get a practice valuation done by ourselves, of which we can analyze the revenue, we can analyze your personal responsibility and growth within that practice, and that will allow us to determine the likely stay-on period in that individual practice scenario.
Thanks, Phil. That's been super useful. If you'd like to get in touch with us for evaluation, please do not hesitate to contact us.